The room spun when I heard her say it. He deserves nothing. Not a penny. I wasn't surprised she said it. I was shocked how calmly she looked me in the eye when she did. My name is Harold Masters. I'm 73 years old, a retired welder, a father, and until recently, I thought I was still part of a family. My son, Matthew, died just 9 months ago. And now, I was sitting in a silent conference room in my late son's law firm, facing his widow, Nada Lyami, daughter-in-law of 23 years, who had just told a probate lawyer I was entitled to none of the $77 million my son left behind. I looked down at my trembling hands. Liver spots, old calluses, thin skin. I once held Matthew's tiny feet in these hands the day he was born, and now his wife looked at them like they were greedy, grasping claws. I took care of him, she said with perfect posture, like she was the one mourning. I supported his career. I bore his children. Harold did none of that. The lawyer, a thin man named Rick Holloway, kept scribbling in a legal pad like this was just another Tuesday. But something passed across his face. A twitch, a shadow at the corner of his mouth. A smirk. Just for a second. That was when I knew. Something wasn't right. I didn't grow up with money. My wife, Eleanor, God rest her, used to joke that we were so poor, we couldn't even afford to die. We raised Matthew in a 2-bedroom walk-up above a barber shop. I worked at the mill. She worked night shifts at the hospital cafeteria. We had dreams for Matthew, and he had bigger ones. By the time he was 35, Matthew had founded a tech company that revolutionized industrial safety compliance. Boring stuff to most people. But he had vision. Made it big. Real big. IPO at 40. Built a mansion in Palo Alto. Started wearing suits that cost more than I made in a month. He never made me feel small, though. Not once. He called every Sunday. Flew me out twice a year. Sent flowers for Eleanor every birthday, even after she passed. But Natalie, she didn't like the way he looked at me. Like I was still someone he admired. She always acted nice. Plastic smile, polite. Until Matthew died. A car crash. Sudden. Brutal. No goodbyes. At the funeral, Natalie didn't cry. Her mascara stayed perfect the whole time. I stood by the casket, hand on the wood, unable to breathe, while she greeted people like it was a cocktail party. After that, I barely heard from her. No invitations. No calls. No updates on my grandkids. And now this. She's contesting the family provision. The lawyer said to me in a low voice after she left the room. There's a clause in the trust that allows some discretion. But I'm his father, I said. I don't want a handout. I just want the would have wanted. Rick Holloway looked at me for the first time without condescension. Just a flicker of curiosity. Do you have a will? Your own assets? I laughed bitterly. My assets? I have a '94 Ford and a pension check. I rent a room in a senior apartment complex. My TV's older than my youngest grandson. He nodded and pushed his glasses up. Then I suppose this is about more than money. It was about respect. About being seen. About being part of a legacy that bore my name. About not being erased from my own son's life. And that smirk he gave when Natalie stormed out, it made me wonder. Why would a lawyer smirk in a moment like this? I started digging. Not out of bitterness. Out of instinct. Something didn't add up. First, I called Matthew's college roommate, Thomas Lee. They hadn't spoken in years, but Tom was still grateful to Matthew for investing in his startup. I asked if he knew anything about Natalie's influence on Matthew's estate. There was a long silence on the line. I shouldn't say anything, Tom muttered. But Matt once told me he set up a private trust. Said he wanted to make sure Dad would never be forgotten. Said he didn't trust Natalie with everything. My heart thudded. Private trust? I asked. Yeah, not part of the main will. Something separate. Now why hadn't Rick mentioned that? The next call I made was to Lilamy, oldest granddaughter, just 19, in her second year of college. She hadn't answered my messages in months, but this time, her voice trembled when she picked up. Grandpa, she whispered. Are you okay? No, I said honestly. And I don't think your dad would be either. Over coffee in a quiet cafe off campus, Lily told me everything. After Dad died, she said, Mom got weird. Like cold. She started locking his office. She told us not to talk about him anymore. Said we had to move forward. Did he ever mention anything about a trust? I asked. Lily nodded slowly. He said if anything happened to him, I should make sure you got the letter in the safe. But, after he died, Mom emptied everything. My throat tightened. What letter? I don't know, but it was sealed. With your name on it. She handed me a USB drive. I found this hidden behind one of his monitors. I think it's encrypted. I didn't know what to do with it. I knew. I took it straight to the one person I knew who could help, an old neighbor's kid, Jordan, who was now a cybersecurity analyst. 3 hours later, Jordan called me. Harold, you need to see this. On the drive over, I kept thinking about that smirk. That single curl of a lawyer's mouth that said he knew something no one else did. When Jordan pulled up the decrypted document, I felt my legs go weak. It was a video, recorded just 5 weeks before Matthew died. He looked tired, but clear-eyed, speaking straight to the camera. If you're seeing this, I didn't die peacefully, and Natalie's going to fight this. But this is my voice, my will, and my truth. I sobbed through most of it, but I held on long enough to hear the most important part. I set up a secondary trust for my father, Harold Masters. He made me who I am. This is my way of making sure he's never forgotten. My hands trembled as I grabbed Jordan's wrist. Where is it? How do we find it? Jordan smiled. There's a digital key, and it's in your name. I returned to Rick Holloway's office 2 days later. Calm, steady, holding a manila folder. Natalie was already seated, legs crossed, sipping something from a travel mug like she was on a flight to Milan. She glanced at me. Come to beg. I said nothing, just slid the folder across the table. Rick opened it. His eyes widened. He looked at me, then at Natalie, then back again. This changes everything. Natalie leaned over, snatching the document. Her mouth twitched as she read. This can't be real. This isn't part of the estate. No, I said, voice even. It was outside of your reach. And then I saw it. That smirk again, but different now. Not mocking. Not sly. Respectful. You're going to want to sit down, Rick told her gently. And for the first time in all these months, Natalie looked afraid. Natalie didn't sit down. She stood frozen, lips parted, eyes scanning the paper again and again, like she could blink away the truth if she just refused to accept it long enough. The silence in the room grew heavy, thick with all the lies and control she had exercised and now loosed in a single afternoon. You forged this, she finally snapped, voice sharp as glass. There's no way Matthew would have done this behind my back. Rick cleared his throat, adjusting his tie. It's been authenticated. Digital signature, matching biometric encryption. The secondary trust was routed through a Delaware shell corporation, clearly listed under Matthew's initials and time-stamped 6 weeks before his death. The legal validity is sound. Her fingers tightened around the edges of the letter. He never even mentioned this to me. And maybe that, I said quietly, was exactly the point. Her face flushed. She looked at me like I was a mosquito in her wine, something old, irrelevant, that just refused to die quietly. You think this makes you part of his world? She hissed. You didn't build any of it. You weren't in the boardroom. You weren't by his side when he worked 18-hour days. You sat in your little apartment while I helped him build an empire. I held her gaze. No, I said. I was too busy helping him become the man who could. Rick shuffled a few papers and glanced at me, then back at Natalie. There's more, he said. Mr. Masters is not only a beneficiary, he's a named trustee. Her jaw dropped. A trustee? She sputtered. That means he controls disbursements? Yes, Rick said slowly. He holds a 51% decision power on the trust's direction, investments, and philanthropic efforts. The rest is divided between your children. Natalie's voice cracked. That's ridiculous. He's not even business-minded. He's just some factory worker. No, I corrected her gently. I'm a father, and Matthew knew exactly what that meant. She stood, teeth clenched so tight I could see the strain in her jawline. This isn't over, she said, voice low. Not by a long shot. And she walked out, the travel mug still in her hand, untouched. That night, I sat on the small patio behind my apartment, an old blanket draped over my legs, and watched the stars as if I might see Matthew's face among them. I thought about what had just happened, what it meant. The trust was real. It existed. I wasn't just a footnote in my son's legacy, I was a pillar in it. The funds were significant, not as large as the primary estate, but enough to matter. Enough to reshape lives, not just mine. But I didn't feel triumphant. I felt lonely. For all I had won, my son was still gone. My daughter-in-law still hated me. My grandkids had been pulled into a silent war they didn't choose. And the world still turned, indifferent to the cracks forming in families like ours. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Lily. Grandpa, Mom's going crazy. I don't know what's going to happen, but I just wanted you to know I am proud of you. Then another, from a number I didn't recognize. Mr. Masters, this is Henry, your grandson. Mom blocked me from contacting you after the funeral. Can we talk? My hands shook as I typed back. Yes, always. In the weeks that followed, things escalated. Natalie filed a formal objection in probate court, claiming emotional distress and alleging that I had manipulated her daughter into giving me access to Matthew's files. Her lawyer tried to portray me as a senile, confused old man preyed upon by savvier parties. It didn't work. The video testimony sealed it. So did the forensics. But even with the case settled, Natalie refused peace. She cut off the grandkids' phone lines, removed them from social media, and started rumors among extended family that I was only after money. I'd won in court but lost the heart of the home. Until one day, Lily showed up on my doorstep. She looked older than 19, hollow-eyed, pale, but determined. She said if I saw you again, she'd cut me off, she said quietly. Then why are you here? I asked. She took a breath. Because she already has. She didn't like that I testified, so she said I was on my own now. My chest ached. I opened the door wider. Then come in, sweetheart. You're home. I didn't use the money the way Natalie feared. I didn't buy a mansion. I didn't replace my Ford. I didn't suddenly start wearing gold watches and eating at five-star restaurants. Instead, I bought silence. Not the silence of fear, but the kind that comes with stability. I paid off Lily's tuition, set up accounts for each grandchild, equal and untouched by Natalie's influence. Donated $250,000 to the hospital where Eleanor worked her whole life. Had her name engraved in the donor's garden wall. I moved into a modest little house not far from Lily's campus. Quiet, surrounded by trees. The kind of place Matthew always said I deserved one day. I made sandwiches for Henry when he finally dared to come see me, tall and thin and nervous, with a voice deeper than I remembered. I met Emily, the youngest, for the first time in 2 years. She clung to my waist like I was air after drowning. Each child, one by one, found their way back. But not Natalie, and I stopped hoping she would. It wasn't until nearly a year later that I saw her again. It was Lily's college graduation. She had insisted I sit front row, and when she received her diploma, she looked right at me and her mother and blew me a kiss. Natalie sat near the back, alone. After the ceremony, she approached. Slowly, cautiously, her expression unreadable. I heard you bought the old field near the elementary school, she said. I nodded, turning it into a community garden. For the kids. Silence. Then, her voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. They still talk about you. At home. I raised an eyebrow. You let them talk now? She looked away. No, but they do it anyway. The air between us pulsed with a history too heavy for words. All the years. All the pain. She loved you, she said suddenly. Eleanor. I didn't get it. Thought it was a small life. All that simple food and quiet music. I never saw what she saw in you. I gave her a small smile. That's okay. She saw enough for both of us. Natalie exhaled. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. Do you hate me? I thought about it. No, I said. I just don't trust you. She nodded, like she already knew that answer. Then she walked away, swallowed by the crowd. Later that night, I sat in the garden behind my house. Lily's graduation cap sat on my lap, and the porch lights flickered above. The world had shifted. I was no longer just a father. I was a steward, a keeper of legacy. The man who would remember Matthew not for his money but for the heart he had, the family he left, the message he left behind. Never forget who you are, Dad. I closed my eyes and whispered into the air. I won't, son. I never will. That summer, everything felt like it had slowed down. Not in the way old age creeps into your bones, but in the way healing demands stillness. I spent my mornings in the garden planting squash, carrots, strawberries. Emily came by after school and named every tomato plant after a cartoon character. Henry mowed the lawn without being asked. And Lily brought books for me to read when the heat made my knees ache too much to do anything else. They were rebuilding me, one visit at a time. But underneath the calm, I knew a reckoning still lingered. Not legal, not financial, emotional. There were still wounds too deep to dress. Still questions about how Natalie had come to hate me so easily, so thoroughly. And about Matthew, about why he hadn't told me himself about the trust. Why he'd waited until death to speak the truth. One afternoon, I found an answer. It came in a small brown envelope, tucked into the lining of an old coat Eleanor had made for Matthew when he was in college. I'd been packing boxes for a local charity drive and stumbled on the jacket by accident. Inside the breast pocket, faded and barely legible, was my name in Matthew's handwriting. Dad, read this when I'm gone, or if I get too scared to say it to your face. I hope it's the first. I sat on the edge of the bed and unfolded the note with trembling hands. Dear Dad, you taught me how to hold a wrench, how to tie my shoes, how to stand up straight even when I was shaking inside. But the hardest lesson you taught me was love. Real love. The kind that isn't loud. The kind that never leaves. I think I married someone who couldn't understand that kind of love. Natalie's love was transactional, showy, performance-based. She loved me more when I succeeded, less when I failed. And when I got sick before the crash, I felt that love disappear. That's why I created the trust. Because I knew she wouldn't keep you in our lives if I were gone. I saw the way she looked at you sometimes. Like you were a leftover from a past she wanted to erase. But you're my foundation, Dad. You always were. And I needed a way to protect that part of me. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. I didn't want you to feel like Charity. I didn't want you to think I saw you as a problem to solve. You're not. You're a gift. A compass. The quiet voice I still hear every time I have to make a hard decision. Don't let them rewrite me after I'm gone. Don't let the money change what we had. You already had the richest part of me. Love. Matt. I cried harder reading that than I had at the funeral. Because it wasn't about the money. It never was. It was about being remembered in truth. About not being reshaped by grief or power or manipulation. It was about legacy. And for the first time, I understood this was not just about restoring my dignity. It was about preserving his. The garden became something sacred after that. Word spread about the community plot. Neighbors dropped by with seeds. The local elementary school sent a dozen second graders to plant sunflower rings around the fence. We put up a painted sign that read Matt's garden grown with quiet hands and loud hearts. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't newsworthy. But people noticed. Even people I never expected. One day, Natalie showed up. Not in designer heels or expensive sunglasses. No makeup. Hair tied back. A plain t-shirt and jeans. She looked small. Not physically. Emotionally. She stood at the gate like she wasn't sure she was allowed to come in. I wiped my hands on a towel and walked over. Lily told me about the letter, she said softly. I nodded. He left truth for all of us. Whether we were ready for it or not. I was never ready, she admitted. For his death. For the responsibility. For the silence after he was gone. Her eyes filled with something that almost looked like shame. I was angry, she continued. Because I didn't get that kind of love from my family. And I didn't know what to do with a man who still called his father every Sunday. Who loved in quiet ways. I thought you were a weakness in him. I studied her face. Not out of judgment. Out of curiosity. What do you think now? She took a long breath. I think I was jealous. Of a love I never had the patience to understand. I stepped aside. Come in, I said. There's work to be done. The reconciliation wasn't instant. And it wasn't perfect. But it was honest. Natalie started showing up at the garden. First just to help dig. Then to donate. Then to bring her youngest children who clung to her legs like they didn't know if it was okay to smile again. They did, eventually. The way kids always do when the grown-ups finally stop fighting long enough to let them. One afternoon, I caught Natalie alone at the back of the lot, standing in front of a wooden bench carved with Matthew's name. I think he would have liked this, she said. I nodded. He would have loved seeing you here, too. Her eyes filled with tears. She didn't wipe them. I thought money was the only legacy, she whispered. But this is so much louder than any check. And in that moment, I saw it not redemption, but recognition. She had finally seen him. And by extension, me. 6 months later, we held the first Matthew Masters Foundation Harvest Day. Families came from all over the city. Kids painted rocks and hid them in the flower beds. Elderly couples picked fresh herbs. Teens took selfies under the grapevines. Lily gave a speech that made half the crowd cry. When it was over, I stood alone on the garden path as the sun dipped low. The shadows grew long and soft. I could almost hear Eleanor's laugh, light on the breeze, and Matthew's footsteps behind me. But it wasn't a ghost I heard. It was Henry. Grandpa, he said, breathless. Come quick. They need help setting up the projector. I smiled. Lead the way. And as I followed him, cane in hand, knees aching but heart light, I realized I had become something I never expected. Not just the patriarch of a fractured family, but the keeper of its soul. That fall, something remarkable happened. Henry asked if he could move in with me. "I can't take Mom anymore," he said, standing awkwardly by my kitchen table with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. "She's trying, I know, but every time she talks about Dad, she makes it sound like he belonged only to her. Like you were just background noise." I didn't answer right away. I walked over to the old cupboard, poured him a glass of iced tea just the way he liked it, 2 sugars, no lemon, and slid it across the table. "You have to understand," I said. "Grief doesn't always look like sadness. Sometimes it looks like control. Sometimes it looks like rewriting history so it hurts less." Henry sipped the tea, eyes downcast. "Yeah, well, I want my own history." And so he stayed. We shared meals, stories, quiet mornings where we sat on the porch and listened to the wind move through the trees. I taught him how to sharpen garden shears. He taught me how to use Spotify. One evening, as we sat watching a documentary on national parks, he said, "You know what I remember most about Dad?" I looked over. "That time he cried in the garage," Henry said. "He thought I didn't see. I was like 10. He was holding a photo of Grandma, and he just broke. That's when I realized he wasn't invincible." I swallowed hard. "I think he got that softness from her," I said. Henry nodded. "But the strength? That's all you." Around the same time, Lily started volunteering at a local legal clinic, helping seniors understand housing contracts and medical paperwork. One day, she brought home a stack of pamphlets. "Do you know how many elderly folks lose their homes because of fine print?" she asked, fired up. "They sign one form and boom out on the street. It's disgusting." I smiled. "You're becoming dangerous, aren't you?" "I learned from the best," she replied, grinning. "You stood up to someone with millions of dollars and power and made the truth louder than all that. I want to help people like that, too." That night, I added a new line to the trust disbursement plan, a permanent grant to support legal aid for vulnerable seniors in the Bay Area. I called it Eleanor's Fund, because if there's one thing my wife had taught Methruff all the years of quiet labor, and even quieter sacrifices, it's that dignity doesn't come with a price tag. Natalie kept her distance. She didn't attend Thanksgiving, though the kids invited her. She didn't come to the Harvest fundraiser in December. She sent gifts by mail, but never attached her name. Then, on Christmas Eve, I got a knock on the door. It was snowing lightly. She wore a simple coat, no makeup, and held a tray of gingerbread cookies. "I don't want to come in," she said quickly. I wanted to say something." I stepped onto the porch. She looked up at me, and for the first time, there was no trace of defense in her expression. "I'm sorry," she said. "Not just for court, or for cutting you out, but for everything. For turning my grief into a weapon. For teaching my kids that love only comes in one shape." She swallowed hard. "You were a better father to Matthew than I ever gave you credit for. And you're a better grandfather to them now than I ever could be on my own." I stood there, the snow landing gently on both our shoulders. "You're doing what you can now," I said. "That counts more than what you didn't do before." She nodded. "I don't know how to make it right," she whispered. "Then don't try to make it perfect," I replied. "Just make it honest." She left the tray and walked away. I watched her disappear into the falling snow. Inside the tray, beneath the cookies, was a folded note. "Thank you for raising the man I loved. I see now how much of him lived in you." I sat by the fire that night, watching the tree lights blink on and off, and thought about how forgiveness isn't something you give once. It's something you practice, like gardening, like love, like faith in people. As the months rolled into a new year, the garden grew wilder, greener, louder with birdsong. And so did the family. Emily joined a youth orchestra. Henry got accepted to a forestry program. Lily was offered an internship in Washington, D.C. Each of them carried pieces of Matthew, and pieces of Eleanor, and, whether they realized it or not, pieces of me. Sometimes, I'd sit at the bench with Matthew's name carved into the wood and imagine what he'd say now, if he could see us. Would he be proud? Would he laugh at the drama, or shake his head at the slow unraveling of secrets? Or would he just smile quiet and knowing, because he'd always trusted that, in time, we'd find our way back to each other? One spring afternoon, I got my answer. Lily returned from D.C. with a box tucked under her arm. She placed it in my lap without saying anything. "What's this?" I asked. Something I found in one of Dad's old file backups. It was labeled, Dad's Legacy Project. I don't think Mom ever saw it. Inside were letters, drafts, plans, a map of the garden drawn in pencil, notes about community, about family, about how legacy isn't about what you leave behind but who you leave it with. At the very bottom was a single sheet of paper. A question in my son's handwriting. What would the world look like if everyone loved like my father does? I wept, because maybe that was the point all along. Not the $77 million, not the lawsuits or the smirks or even the trust, but the kind of love that quietly endures, that bends but doesn't break, that forgives, that teaches, that plants, and waits, until it grows. Spring turned into summer, and with it, a kind of peace settled over my days. Not the peace of silence or solitude, but the kind that comes from knowing you've done your part, that something good will keep living on long after you're gone. I had never been much for public speaking, but that June, I was asked to give a short talk at the city's annual Founders and Families civic event. Someone had nominated the Matthew Masters Community Garden as a symbol of generational legacy. I wanted to say no, my knees were aching, my voice not what it used to be, but Lily insisted. Just tell them what you told me, she said, adjusting my collar before the ceremony. Tell them the truth. And so, under a white tent with folding chairs and toddlers running in circles behind the crowd, I stood at a podium, cleared my throat, and began. When I was a boy, my father told me the only thing a man owns at the end of his life is how he treated people. I looked out across the sea of faces. Young ones, old ones, a few I didn't know, some I did. I didn't always get it right. I didn't have much growing up, but I had hands that knew how to work and a heart that knew how to stay. I paused, looked down at the note I'd written but didn't need. My son built something much bigger than I ever did. He earned wealth I never imagined. And for a moment, after he passed, I thought that meant I didn't belong in his story anymore. My voice caught. Lily moved closer, just in case I needed her. But what I've learned, I said, steadying myself, is that love doesn't expire with someone's name. It doesn't disappear when a will is read. Love survives in the people who keep showing up. I looked out to the edge of the crowd, where Natalie stood. She gave a single nod. That was enough. I thought this garden would be about him, I said. But it turns out, it's about all of us. Applause rose slowly. Not thunderous, not flashy, but honest, just like he would have wanted. A week later, I went to the lawyer's office to finalize the remaining paperwork on the trust. Rick was different now, less stiff, more human. I've never seen a case turn out like this, he said, clicking through his computer. Normally, the families splinter. No one talks again. It gets ugly. But you brought them back together. I didn't do it alone, I said. He smiled. No, but you were the root. He handed me one last document. A final discretionary release me portion of the trust. Any plans for it, he asked. I nodded. I'm going to disappear. Rick raised an eyebrow. Not literally, I clarified, but quietly. I've had my name in enough headlines for one life. He chuckled. Well, however you choose to disappear, you did good, Mr. Masters. I walked out into the summer sun feeling lighter than I had in decades. I spent the following weeks preparing. I donated my old tools to the community college, left my house to Lily in a sealed envelope marked, "Open when you're ready to rest." Gave my car to Henry, who'd just passed his licensing test. I packed a single suitcase with clothes, a few books, and a photo of Eleanor and me on our wedding day. Then I bought a one-way train ticket to a small town I'd always dreamed of visiting, somewhere in Oregon, near the coast, where the wind always smelled like pine and salt and freedom. Before I left, I wrote a letter. To my family. By the time you read this, I'll be where the birds fly low and the sea never asks questions. Don't worry, I am okay. I'm just giving you space to grow without my shadow. You don't need me to be the glue anymore. You've become your own structure, stronger than anything I could have built alone. Matthew lives in each of you. His kindness, his fire, his belief in second chances. So keep planting, keep forgiving, keep coming home to each other. I'll always be proud of you, and I'll always be listening. Dad and Grandpa. The train moved like time does, slow, deliberate, humming through towns that blink past like memories. I watched the trees roll by, each one a reminder of how much can grow when roots hold strong. I didn't know exactly what I was going toward, but I knew what I was leaving behind. Not loss, Not regret, but a legacy that would outlast any fortune. The garden would bloom again next spring. New hands would tend it. New hearts would kneel in the dirt. And somewhere down the line, one of them might ask, "Who planted this?" And maybe, just maybe, someone would smile and say, "A man who loved quietly." Lily stood before a group of teenagers holding garden trowels and seed packets. She wore a wide straw hat, her arms sun-kissed and strong. "This garden started with grief," she told them, "but it grew with hope. My grandfather built it so no one would be forgotten. So every time we plant something, we're telling the world we were here and we mattered." A little boy raised his hand. "What happened to your grandpa?" Lily knelt, brushing soil from her gloves. "He left us something better than answers," she said. "He left us roots." Later that day, as she watered the strawberries and the late summer air buzzed with crickets, a letter arrived. It had no return address. Inside was a single photo. Her, Matthew, and Harold, arms wrapped tight, smiling like they'd already forgiven everything. On the back, in Harold's handwriting, "Love them until they understand why."